All right, so today we're going to dive into something pretty interesting, I think.
Okay.
Stephen King's Rage. Have you heard of this one?
Oh, yeah, Rage. Very controversial novella.
Yeah, and we've got some source material, excerpts from
Yeah.
the book, and then also the Wikipedia page for it. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today, Rage.
Yeah, I think it's especially interesting that you say controversial, because Rage is very different from a lot of King's other works.
Uh-huh.
And, it was originally published under a pseudonym, Richard Bachman.
Right.
And then King decided to pull it from publication.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that jumps out right away from the Wikipedia entry. Books withdrawn from publication, literature controversies.
Yeah.
Like right there, you want to know more about this.
Right.
But can you just remind me a little bit about this whole Richard Bachman thing?
Sure.
It's been a while since I really thought about,
Yeah.
King's history.
So King, he wanted to test if his success was tied to his name or his writing.
Okay.
So he wanted to use a pseudonym to be able to release work without having that Stephen King fame attached to it.
Uh-huh.
And it was a pretty elaborate act, actually. There were even rumors that Bachman was this, reclusive, tortured genius.
Oh, wow. So there's, this whole other layer of mystery, going on with this book.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating. Okay, so... But before we get too sidetracked by his backstory and all that, let's talk about what the story actually is.
Okay.
I know you're good at this, so give us the rundown on Rage. What is it?
All right, so picture this a typical high school classroom, maybe even one you sat in yourself.
Okay.
Now imagine a student, Charlie Decker, brings a gun to school and takes his whole class hostage.
Oh, wow.
That's how Rage kicks off, and the whole story unfolds from this tense pressure cooker situation.
So, yeah, I mean, we're dealing with some really intense stuff right off the bat.
Yeah.
I can see why it would be controversial, but I was looking at the excerpts you sent me, and the first line of the book is, "The morning I got it on was nice, a nice May morning. What made it nice was that I'd kept my breakfast down and the squirrel I spotted in Alchford II." I mean, it's almost creepy how normal it sounds,
It's incredibly effective.
Yeah.
King, he immediately establishes this sense of normalcy with almost mundane details, and it makes the violence that follows even more jarring.
Right.
And you have to remember, this was written in the 70s when school shootings weren't yet part of the daily news cycle. So the shock value must have been immense.
I bet, yeah. And probably, I'm sure that contributed to its popularity, but let's think about that for a second. That 70s context.
Okay.
What was going on socially, culturally,
Sure.
that might have influenced the book and how people responded to it.
Well, the 70s were a time of immense social change. The Vietnam War,
Uh-huh.
the Watergate scandal, a growing sense of disillusionment with authority. Young people were questioning traditional values, and there was this simmering unrest kind of bubbling beneath the surface of American society.
Right.
So it's not a coincidence that King, a young writer himself at the time, tapped into that angst.
So Rage was kind of a reflection of those anxieties.
Absolutely.
Maybe fears about, the potential for violence.
Yeah, and for readers at the time, it probably felt both thrilling and terrifying. It allowed them to explore those dark impulses vicariously through the eyes of Charlie without actually having to act on them.
Yeah, and I mean, as times changed, though, as school shootings tragically, became more and more common, I mean, the book takes on a whole different meaning.
Right.
And you can see how King may have started to really worry about the impact.
Yeah, the line between exploring darkness in fiction and potentially inspiring real-life harm became much blurrier.
Right.
And King, to his credit, was willing to acknowledge that and take responsibility.
Yeah, and that's what brings us to this, controversy of withdrawing the book, and we'll get into the ethics of that later on. But for now, let's just stick with Charlie.
Yeah.
What do we know about him? What else can we glean from these excerpts about his motivations?
Well, there are glimpses into his past, like the incident with the broken pipe wrench and this really tense relationship with his father, that suggest a pattern of anger and resentment simmering beneath the surface.
Okay.
He even admits at one point, "Now I wish it was him I'd killed if I had to kill anyone. This thing on the floor between my feet is a classic case of misplaced aggression."
Yeah, that's a chilling line.
Yeah.
But also you see that flicker of self-awareness.
Yeah.
He's kind of understanding his own destructiveness in a way.
Right.
It makes you wonder how much of this rage stems from this conflict with his father.
Yeah, and there's another scene that's particularly revealing, a flashback to Charlie at just 4 years old, smashing every storm window in his house.
Yeah.
And his father reacts with brutal force And it seems to be a turning point in their relationship.
Yeah, I mean, we all do dumb stuff as kids, but
Yeah.
to have that kind of reaction,
Yeah.
I mean, that would scar someone.
It speaks to the idea that trauma can have a ripple effect, influencing our behavior and worldview in ways we don't even realize.
Right.
And in Charlie's case, it seems like that early trauma laid the groundwork for the explosive rage that ultimately defines him.
Yeah, so we've got this kid, Charlie, dealing with some serious baggage from his past. Now he's holding his classmates hostage.
Right.
But the excerpts also show that, it's not just Charlie who's struggling.
Yeah.
Like, his classmates have their own issues, their own secrets.
It's true. Take Pigpen, for example. He has this heart-wrenching breakdown where he talks about the constant pressure from his mother, how she just grinds and grinds and grinds him down. It's a powerful reminder that every student in that classroom is carrying their own burdens, their own unspoken anxieties.
And that brings up the dynamic, between Charlie and his classmates.
Yeah, it's not, a clear-cut good versus evil situation, right?
No.
Their reactions to him are way more complex than that.
Exactly. We see fear, of course, but also curiosity, even moments of understanding.
Yeah.
There's a scene where Grace Stanner actually defends Charlie's actions.
Wow.
It highlights this ambiguity of the situation.
Yeah.
It's like she sees something in him that others don't.
It's almost like by breaking all the rules, he's forcing them to confront their own suppressed emotions.
Right.
Okay, so let's introduce one more key player here.
Okay.
Ted Jones.
Ted. He's an interesting one.
Yeah.
He starts off as this classic all-American golden boy, good grades, popular athletic. But as the hostage situation unfolds, cracks begin to appear in his facade.
Oh.
He challenges Charlie, almost taunts him, which seems to further fuel Charlie's rage.
It's like they're locked in this weird power struggle,
Absolutely.
pushing each other to the edge.
Remember the scene where Charlie fires the gun next to Ted's head?
Yeah. King describes Ted's reaction as a stew of changing emotions, white astonishment, agonized disbelief, and twisted murdering hate.
Oh.
It's like that near-death experience awakens something dark within Ted, too.
It's like they're both mirroring and feeding off of each other's darkest impulses.
Exactly.
And it makes you wonder if on some level they're both kind of victims of the same societal pressures.
Exactly. Ted represents the kind of conformity and achievement that Charlie feels he can never attain. And by rebelling against that, Charlie exposes the hypocrisy and darkness that can lurk beneath those seemingly perfect facades.
Okay, so we've got this intense backdrop of societal unrest.
Right.
We've got a troubled protagonist with a traumatic past.
Uh-huh.
And we've got this classroom full of teenagers all grappling with their own demons.
Yeah.
So Rage is shaping up to be a pretty wild ride.
It is.
But I want to hear more about how King explores those teenage anxieties.
Yeah.
And how that might have connected with readers.
Well, in the next section, we'll dig into some key scenes and analyze how King uses dialogue, character interactions, and even subtle details to paint this really vivid portrait of adolescent angst, rebellion, and the dangerous consequences of feeling unheard and unseen.
That sounds fascinating.
Oh, wow.
I can't wait. We were just talking about how, Rage taps into all those anxieties of adolescence, especially for teenagers in the 70s.
Right.
I'm wondering, are there any specific scenes in these excerpts, interactions that really kind of highlight that?
There are a few that stand out. One that struck me is the scene at Carol Granger's birthday party.
Okay.
Charlie describes this humiliating experience where he feels completely ostracized, ridiculed. And it's a small moment in the grand scheme of things, but it speaks volumes about the lasting impact of social rejection, especially during those formative years.
Yeah, I remember that scene. He talks about feeling like a complete social leper.
Yeah.
And you can just feel that sting, of rejection and how it just feeds into his isolation and his anger.
Exactly. And it highlights a theme that runs throughout the book, the disconnect between how teenagers perceive themselves and how they're perceived by the adult world.
Okay.
Charlie feels like an outsider, a misfit. And his actions, however extreme, are a way of trying to assert control.
Right.
To force people to see him on his own terms.
It's interesting you say, this idea of control.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be a recurring theme. He takes control of the classroom.
Right.
But he also tries to control the narrative.
Yeah.
The way his classmates see him.
Absolutely.
He forces them to share their secrets, to kind of confront their own vulnerabilities.
There's a scene where he makes two of the girls, Irma and Grace, engage in this brutal verbal fight.
Uh-huh.
And it's disturbing for sure, but it also reveals Charlie's twisted attempt to break down social hierarchies
Yeah.
and force a kind of raw honesty that he feels is missing in their everyday interactions.
It's like he's created this bizarre group therapy session
Yeah.
gone wrong. And in a way, it kind of speaks to that pressure that teenagers feel to fit in, to conform
Yeah.
to these unspoken social rules. And Charlie, by shattering all those rules,
Right.
is almost daring them to be more authentic.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's using violence and intimidation,
Yeah.
but in doing so, he's also creating a space for vulnerability and honesty
Right.
that wouldn't have existed otherwise. It's certainly not the way to go about it.
Right.
But it does make you think about the ways in which teenagers, especially those who feel marginalized,
Uh-huh.
might try to assert their identity and find connection.
Yeah, it reminds me of how, social media can be used both to project this perfect image,
Right.
but also to share really raw personal struggles.
Absolutely.
Like teenagers today are constantly trying to navigate that tension
Yeah.
between fitting in and standing out.
That's a brilliant connection.
Yeah.
It shows how the themes explored in Rage, while rooted in the specific context of the 70s, still resonate with young people today. The ways in which they try to connect, to express themselves, to grapple with issues like identity and belonging,
Right.
those are timeless human struggles amplified by the unique pressures of adolescence.
Right. And that brings us back to, why King decided to withdraw the book.
Yeah.
What was it about Rage specifically
Right.
that made him worry about the potential for harm?
Well, the book's realistic depiction of a school shooting, coupled with Charlie's articulate and at times sympathetic portrayal, made some people fear that it could be seen as a blueprint or justification for similar acts of violence.
Okay.
And remember, this was before Columbine, before school shootings became tragically commonplace.
Right.
The idea that a book could inspire such an act was both shocking and deeply unsettling.
And King has talked about receiving letters, from troubled teenagers
Right.
who seem to identify with Charlie a little too closely.
Yes, and that must have been a truly sobering experience for him. To realize that something he created, something born from his own imagination, could potentially have such devastating real-world consequences.
Yeah.
It's a heavy burden for any artist to bear.
Yeah. And it raises all those ethical questions,
Right.
Where do we draw the line between, freedom of expression
Yeah.
and the responsibility to prevent harm? Is it ever justified to censor a work of art,
Right.
even if it's disturbing or potentially dangerous?
These are questions that have been debated for centuries, and there are no easy answers.
Right.
But in King's case, he ultimately decided that the potential risk outweighed the benefits of keeping the book in circulation.
Yeah, which is a pretty bold move, for an author to make.
It is.
Especially when the book was still popular
Right.
and, selling well.
Yeah,
It shows that he was grappling with this on a personal level,
absolutely.
not just, a financial one.
And it's worth noting that King's decision wasn't universally applauded. Some people accused him of censorship, of pandering to public fear, of stifling important conversations about difficult topics.
It's a complex issue
It is.
with valid arguments on both sides.
Right.
But I think regardless of where you stand on this debate, it's hard to deny that his decision sparked this much larger conversation
It did.
about, the power of storytelling,
Right.
the responsibility of artists, this delicate balance between creative freedom and the potential for real-world impact.
And that's something we see playing out even today, especially in the age of social media where ideas and images can spread like wildfire.
Right.
It raises the question, how do we engage with difficult and potentially harmful content in a responsible way without resorting to outright censorship?
Yeah, it's a tough question
It is.
with no easy answers, but it's one we need to keep asking ourselves.
We do.
As consumers of art, as members of society,
Absolutely.
as individuals grappling with our own internal struggles.
And Rage, even though it's no longer officially published, continues to be a catalyst for that conversation.
Right, so we've talked about the context.
Yeah.
The pressures facing teenagers in the 70s.
Uh-huh.
This whole controversy surrounding its withdrawal, the
yeah.
ethical dilemmas it raises.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this part of our conversation,
Okay.
I want to bring it back to Charlie.
Sure.
Despite his flaws, and all his disturbing actions,
Yeah.
are there any moments in these excerpts that show a different side to him?
There are a few glimpses of vulnerability that hint at something more complex than just pure rage. One that stands out is the scene at the very end,
Okay.
where Charlie, after releasing his classmates, imagines the Times Square New Year's Eve ball drop. He describes it as a pretty sight. Makes you feel like anything's possible.
Yeah, it's such a poignant moment.
It is.
Especially, considering the circumstances.
All right.
Like, even in this moment of utter chaos and despair, he's still capable of appreciating beauty and, feeling this sense of hope, however fleeting. What do you make of that?
It suggests a longing for connection, a recognition of the larger world outside the confines of the classroom.
Okay.
And it raises the question, is there a part of Charlie that yearns for something more, something beyond the anger and isolation that have consumed him?
It's a powerful question. And it speaks to that complexity of human nature.
Yeah.
Even in the darkest of halts,
Right.
there can still be, that flicker of hope, a desire for something better.
Right.
But to understand whether that hope can be realized,
Right.
we need to delve deeper into, the psychological nuances of his character and the events that ultimately lead to his downfall.
And in the next section, we'll do just that. We'll explore some key turning points in the narrative and analyze how King masterfully uses symbolism, dialogue, and even subtle shifts in Charlie's internal monologue to create a multi-layered portrait of a deeply troubled but ultimately human character.
I'm really looking forward to unpacking those layers and seeing what other insights we can glean from this fascinating, albeit disturbing work of literature.
We were talking about, those glimpses of vulnerability we see in Charlie.
Yeah.
Even in the middle of, all this chaos he's creating.
Right.
Are there any other moments in these excerpts where he seems to be, reaching out?
Yeah.
Or at least, trying to connect with his classmates?
One scene that comes to mind is when Charlie asks his classmates to share their dreams and aspirations.
Okay.
On the surface, it seems like another power play,
Uh-huh.
a way of forcing them to reveal personal information.
Yeah.
But there's also this sense that he's genuinely interested in their hopes and fears.
Okay.
Like he's searching for common ground, a way to bridge that chasm that separates them.
Yeah, it's like he's conducting these twisted social experiments,
Right.
trying to figure out,
Yeah.
where he fits in
Yeah.
or why he doesn't.
And it speaks to a fundamental human need, the desire to be seen and understood.
Even by those we might fear or dislike.
Yeah.
Charlie, despite his actions, is still a teenager grappling with issues of identity, belonging, and purpose. And in his own distorted way, he's trying to create a space where those issues can be explored, even if it means pushing everyone to their breaking point.
Yeah, that idea of a breaking point.
Yeah.
I mean, there were several moments in the book where characters seemed to reach that point,
Absolutely.
both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, like the incident with the pipe wrench and Charlie's father is one example.
Right.
But there are others too.
Yeah.
And those breaking points often reveal something really profound about the characters
Yeah.
and the forces that have shaped them.
Okay.
Take, for example, the scene where Ted, after being repeatedly taunted and threatened by Charlie,
Yeah.
suddenly lashes out with this surprising act of violence.
Wow.
It's a shocking moment. But it also shows how even the seemingly good characters are capable of darkness
Right.
when pushed to their limits.
Yeah, it's like this whole classroom becomes a pressure cooker.
Uh-huh.
And as the tension builds, everyone's true nature starts to come out.
Right. The lines between victim and aggressor, hero and villain become blurred.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if in different circumstances,
Uh-huh.
any one of these characters could have ended up on a different path.
That's a chilling thought. But, I mean, it speaks to the complexity
It does.
of human behavior.
We all have the capacity for both good and evil.
Right.
And the choices we make are often influenced by this complex interplay of internal and external factors,
Yeah.
and rage, by exploring those gray areas,
Yeah.
challenges us to look beyond simple labels.
Right.
And confront the uncomfortable realities of human nature.
And that's why I think this book is still so compelling.
Yeah.
Even decades after it was written, despite, the controversy and everything,
Right.
it forces us to ask those uncomfortable questions about ourselves, about our society, the systems that can, sometimes create these conditions
Absolutely.
for violence and despair.
It reminds us that even the most disturbing stories can offer valuable insights into the human condition.
Okay.
If we're willing to engage with them thoughtfully and critically. By exploring the darkness,
Right.
we might just gain a better understanding of the light.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
And it feels really relevant, in today's world,
Yeah.
where, violence, division, fear, all that seems to be on the rise.
Right. Rage, while set in a different era, offers a timeless reminder that the choices we make individually and collectively have consequences.
Right.
And it challenges us to seek understanding, empathy, and compassion,
Yeah.
even in the face of darkness.
So we've explored a lot.
Oh, we have.
The background, the plot, the themes, all the controversies, the so what insights.
Right.
But before we wrap up this deep dive into Rage,
Okay.
is there anything else that, really struck you about this book?
One thing that keeps coming back to me is the ending. Charlie, after releasing his classmates, is left alone in the classroom wounded, facing the inevitable consequences of his actions.
Okay.
And in that moment, he breaks down and starts to cry.
Wow.
It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the emotional toll of his journey.
Right.
The weight of his choices.
Yeah, it's a powerful image, and it really stays with you,
It does.
after you finish the book.
It reminds us that even the most hardened individuals are capable of feeling remorse, regret, even a sense of loss for the path they've chosen.
And it leaves us with this final provocative question.
It does.
Is redemption possible?
Right.
Even for someone who's committed such a terrible act?
It's a question that has no easy answers, but it's one that's worth pondering
Right.
as we grapple with the complexities of human nature
Mm-hmm.
and the challenges of forgiveness.
That's a perfect note to end on, thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
Encourages us to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep the conversation going. So to wrap up this deep dive into Stephen King's Rage, I think it's safe to say this is a book that stays with you.
Yeah.
It's disturbing, yes,
Yeah.
but it's also thought-provoking, challenging, and ultimately deeply human.
Absolutely.
As always, we encourage you to go check it out, explore these themes we talked about, come to your own conclusions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring.